Come
"I
on
was just
in.
passing
I'm
by,"
so glad you
the
made it
rancher said
safely.
while knocking, and the Apache
you.
girl gave him a reason to
cabin is
stay. Jacob
beautiful.
Williams had been riding for days. The scorching heat of the desert had made his journey harder than he expected. His clothes were soaked in sweat, and the dust from the dry road clung to his boots, making every step feel like an extra weight he had to carry. He had no idea where he was exactly, but he knew he was far from home. Far from the ranch that kept him busy, and far from the life he knew. He hadn't planned to stop, but when the sight of a small home appeared on the horizon, he felt a wave of relief wash over him. The house was simple, built with what seemed to be the local materials, and its door was slightly open, inviting. Jacob's horse, tired from the long ride, slowed as they approached. The rancher pulled the reins and dismounted, feeling the stiffness in his legs as he stretched. He wiped his brow with the back of his hand and made his way toward the house. When he knocked on the door, he wasn't sure what he was expecting. Maybe a kind stranger, maybe just a moment to rest, or perhaps a quick drink of water before he continued his journey. What he didn't expect was her. The door opened to reveal a woman who was both striking and unfamiliar. She had dark, long hair that fell like a waterfall over her shoulders, and her brown skin seemed to shimmer against the sunlight. Her eyes were deep and steady, not the kind that gave way to easy smiles or quick judgments. She stood in the doorway, her presence calm but strong, as if she were used to the silence of the land and not afraid of it. "Can I help you?" Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of a lifetime in the desert. Jacob blinked, taken aback by her sudden appearance. He quickly found his manners and tipped his hat, though he didn't know why he felt like he should. "I'm sorry to bother you, ma'am. I've been riding for a while and I was hoping to get some rest. Maybe a drink of water if you've got any." The woman studied him for a moment, as if weighing the sincerity of his request. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she stepped aside and motioned for him to come in. "You must be tired. Come inside," she said. Jacob hesitated at first, but the warmth of her gesture eased his hesitation. He stepped into the small house, which smelled of wood and earth, a far cry from the dry, burning desert he had come from. The walls were lined with simple wooden shelves, and a small fire burned in the hearth, crackling gently. A few woven rugs lay scattered on the floor, giving the place a sense of comfort amidst the vast, unchanging land outside. "Thank you," Jacob said as he took a seat at the small table, grateful for the shade and relief from the heat. He wiped his forehead again, his hands rough from the work he did at his ranch. The woman didn't sit down right away. She walked over to a small clay jar and poured him a cup of water. Jacob took it eagerly, the coolness of it refreshing against his parched throat. She watched him with quiet attention, then finally sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. "My name is Ayana," she said softly, her voice carrying a sense of strength that matched her calm demeanor. "And you are?" "Jacob," he replied, still taking in the room around him. "Jacob Williams. I'm a rancher not far from here." Ayana nodded, though Jacob could tell she wasn't familiar with ranching. Her life seemed far removed from the cattle and wide, open spaces that Jacob knew so well. But there was something about her presence that felt rooted in the land, like she belonged to it in a way that Jacob never could. "Why are you traveling out here alone?" Ayana asked, her curiosity genuine but gentle. "It's a long way from the nearest town." Jacob took a moment to consider her question. He had been alone for so long, it almost seemed strange to talk to someone about it. "I've got a ranch," he said after a while. "I'm just checking on things, making sure everything's all right." Yana didn't ask any more questions about his work. Instead, she stared into the fire, her mind clearly somewhere else. Jacob couldn't help but notice the quiet beauty in her face, the way she seemed completely at ease in her surroundings. It made him feel like he had wandered into a world that was both foreign and familiar at the same time. He took another sip of water, his thoughts drifting. "I wasn't expecting to find anyone out here. thought this place was too remote for a person to live. Gianna smiled faintly at that, a trace of amusement in her eyes. "It's more remote than you think," she said softly. "But people like me, family, have lived here for generations. This land is more than just a place. It's home." Her words carried weight, and Jacob couldn't help but feel that she was saying more than she was letting on. There was a depth to her, a quiet strength that intrigued him. He was used to the hard men he worked with, men who didn't speak much but whose actions spoke louder than words. But Ayanna was different. She wasn't like anyone Jacob had ever met before. "You live here alone?" Jacob asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. Ayanna nodded. "My family is out on a hunting trip. They'll be back soon." Jacob could sense that there was something unspoken between them, a silent understanding that neither of them was quite ready to address. The room felt still, the air thick with the weight of their unspoken thoughts. "I don't mean to intrude," Jacob said after a long pause, standing up to stretch his legs. "I can leave if you prefer." Ayanna stood as well, her gaze steady. "You're welcome to stay for as long as you need." Jacob hesitated, then nodded. He wasn't sure why, but something in her tone told him that this wasn't just a simple offer. It felt like an invitation to something more, something he couldn't quite explain. For the rest of the evening, Jacob and Ayanna sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. Jacob's thoughts were scattered, but a part of him was thankful for the quiet. He didn't feel rushed here, as he did back at the ranch. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he could just breathe. As the night grew darker and the wind howled outside, Jacob realized that his plans to leave the next day had begun to shift. He wasn't sure how long he would stay, but he knew this encounter, this meeting with Ayanna, wasn't one he would soon forget. There was something about this place, this woman, that made him want to linger. And for the first time in what felt like ages, he allowed himself to relax. Maybe, just maybe, he would stay. As the fire in the hearth flickered, casting long shadows across the small room, Jacob found himself thinking more and more about the unexpected turn his day had taken. He had come here just looking for a place to rest, but now he couldn't help but feel a sense of connection to this place, and to Ayanna. The evening passed quietly, with Jacob and Ayanna sitting in companionable silence. She occasionally glanced at him, but neither spoke much. The crackling of the fire was the loudest sound in the room, and for a while, that was enough. The outside world seemed far away, as though it had ceased to exist. Jacob felt himself sinking into the peace of the moment, his exhaustion slowly easing. Eventually, the stillness was broken by Ayanna's soft voice. "You're quiet tonight," she said, her eyes meeting his. "Something on your mind?" Jacob shifted in his seat. He hadn't meant to seem distant. The truth was, he didn't know why he was so quiet. Something about the evening, about her, made him reflect on things he had never allowed himself to think about before. Things about his life, the work he did, the years spent on the ranch, and what it all meant. "I guess I'm just tired," Jacob admitted after a moment. "I've been on the road for a while now, not much time to think about anything else." Ayanna nodded as if she understood. "The desert has a way of making you think. It's a quiet place, but there's a lot going on in the silence." Jacob raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Ayanna looked into the fire, her gaze distant for a moment. "The land speaks, but only to those who listen," she said slowly. "You won't hear it with your ears, you'll feel it. If you pay attention, every stone, every tree, every gust of wind carries a message. You just have to be willing to hear it." Jacob considered her words. He had always been a man of action, one who worked with his hands and let his work do the talking. He wasn't used to thinking about the world in the way Ayanna described, but there was something in her voice that made him want to understand. He had never considered the desert or the land that way. To him, it was just a vast, empty place that required hard work to survive. "I never thought of it like that," Jacob said quietly. "I've always been about the work, building the ranch, taking care of the cattle, but now, maybe I'm beginning to see what you mean." Yana turned her gaze toward him, and for the first time since their meeting, Jacob felt a shift between them. It was as if the distance between them had closed. She was no longer just a stranger. She was someone who understood things that he had never fully considered. "There's more to this land than just surviving," Yana said softly. "It's about living with it, being part of it, not just taking from it but giving something back." Jacob looked at her, studying the intensity of her eyes. There was something in the way she spoke that made him want to learn more, to understand her world. She wasn't just talking about land or survival. She was talking about a way of life, a deeper connection to the earth. And for the first time, Jacob felt like he was hearing it, really hearing it, in a way he never had before. The conversation drifted as the night wore on. They spoke about small things, Yana's favorite memories from her childhood, the way the stars looked in the desert sky, and the food she liked to cook when her family was together. Jacob listened, fascinated by the simplicity and beauty of her life. It was so different from his own, yet he found himself longing for the quiet moments she described. "You've lived here your whole life?" Jacob asked, his voice soft. Yana nodded. "Yes, my family has lived on this land for generations. My father, my grandfather, they all worked the land, lived with it." She paused, her voice softening. "It's not easy. Sometimes it feels like the land is fighting back, but that's just part of it. We don't control it, we just learn to live with it." Jacob thought about his own life for a moment. He had spent years working the ranch, building it up from nothing. But even with all the work, it never felt like he was truly in tune with the land. It was a place of business, not of connection. And now, in this quiet house, sitting across from Yana, he realized how much he had been missing. "I think I've been doing it all wrong," Jacob admitted. "I've been so focused on making everything work on the ranch I never thought about being a part of it. I've been running it but not living in it." Yana gave him a thoughtful look. "Maybe it's time to change that," she said. "Maybe it's time to listen to the land instead of just trying to control it." Jacob was quiet for a moment, pondering her words. There was a part of him that wanted to stay, to find out what it would be like to live the way she described. But another part of him knew that he couldn't just abandon his responsibilities. The ranch was his livelihood. It had always been his focus. But Ayana's presence, the way she spoke so confidently about the land and life, made him question his own choices. Perhaps there was more to life than just running the ranch, than just surviving. Perhaps there was a deeper way to live, a way that he had never considered before. The next morning, Jacob woke up early. The house was quiet, the air cool and crisp. Yana was already up, tending to a small fire outside, preparing breakfast. Jacob watched her for a moment, impressed by the ease with which she moved, the grace in her steps. She was so different from the women he had known in town, strong, independent, yet with a quiet kindness that seemed to radiate from her. She turned and saw him standing there. "You're awake early," she said with a small smile. "Did you sleep well?" Jacob nodded. "Yeah, better than I've slept in a long time." Yana gestured to the small campfire she had built. "Come sit, I'm making breakfast." As they ate, the conversation flowed easily between them, with Yana sharing stories of her childhood and Jacob telling her about his life on the ranch. It was a simple meal, just some bread, eggs, and dried meat, but it felt like more. The food tasted different here, as though it carried the essence of the land with it. After breakfast, Jacob helped Ayana with a few chores around the house. As they worked together, he noticed how easy it felt to be with her. There was no rush, no pressure, just a simple connection between them that made the time feel as though it had slowed down. Ayana seemed content in her world, and Jacob admired that. She didn't need anything more than what the land provided. And somehow, in the few short hours he had spent here, he had begun to understand that life didn't have to be about constant striving. There was peace to be found in simply being present, in listening, and in connecting. By midday, Jacob found himself at a crossroads. The ranch was still waiting for him, but he was beginning to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than the never-ending cycle of work and exhaustion. Iana had shown him a different way, a way of living in harmony with the land instead of fighting it. And for the first time in years, Jacob felt like he might actually be able to listen. "You've got a lot of work to do, don't you?" Iana asked, breaking his thoughts. Jacob glanced at her, then nodded. "Yeah, I do." "Maybe you'll come back," she asked, her voice hopeful but calm. Jacob hesitated. He hadn't planned to stay, but now he wasn't so sure. "I might," he said slowly. "I'm not sure yet, but I'm thinking about it." Iana smiled faintly, the kind of smile that made Jacob feel like there was still hope. "Take your time," she said, her eyes meeting his. "The land will still be here." As he stood to leave, Jacob realized that whatever path he chose next, he would carry this moment with him. The peace he felt here, the quiet strength of Iana, and the knowledge that sometimes staying meant listening to what the world had to offer, rather than just pushing forward without ever looking back. Jacob woke to the soft rays of sunlight streaming through the small window. The warmth of the morning sun felt like a gentle reminder that the world outside the little house was still turning, still moving forward, while here, time seemed to stand still. For a moment, he allowed himself to forget everything: his ranch, the long ride, the things that awaited him. It was as if the desert had wrapped its arms around him and told him to stay, to forget the noise of the outside world. But as he got up and stretched, reality began to seep back in. He couldn't stay here forever. The ranch needed him, and the work would pile up if he didn't go back. There were cattle to care for, fences to mend, and the land itself to maintain. A part of him hated the thought of leaving this peaceful place, but another part knew that responsibility called him home. Iana was already up by the time Jacob emerged from the small room. She was standing outside, her face turned toward the rising sun, as if she too was absorbing the stillness of the morning. She seemed to be at peace with the world, her gaze steady and unhurried. Jacob approached her slowly, unsure of what to say. He felt a strange pull toward her, something he couldn't explain. In the short time he had known her, Iana had made him question everything about his life, the way he lived, the way he worked, even the way he thought. It was as though her calmness, her connection to the land, was something he needed to understand. "You're up early," Jacob said, breaking the silence. "I thought I'd be the first one up." Iana smiled, a small, knowing smile that seemed to say she had already anticipated this. "I've been awake for a while," she said. "The desert never sleeps, it wakes with the sun." Jacob nodded, appreciating the simplicity of her words. It was true. The desert had a life of its own, a rhythm that was different from anything he had ever known. "It's beautiful here," he said softly. Iana turned to look at him, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his heart skip a beat. "Yes, it is, but it's also unforgiving. If you're not careful, the land can swallow you whole." Jacob looked out over the desert, the vast emptiness stretching before him. There was a danger in it, a wildness that made him respect it even more. But there was also a beauty, a quiet strength in its stillness. And Iana was a part of it. Her presence seemed to belong to the land, as if she had always been there, as if she had always known its secrets. "I think I've been running from things for a long time," Jacob said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been so focused on the ranch, on work, that I never stopped to think about what really matters. Maybe I'm looking for something I don't even know how to name." Iana didn't say anything at first. She simply watched him as though she could see the weight he carried, the burdens he didn't want to speak aloud. She had been raised in the desert, where the land didn't ask for explanations. It simply was. But here, with Jacob, she could see the way his heart and mind were tangled up in the things he didn't understand. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," Iana said gently. "The land will teach you in time. You just have to be willing to listen." Jacob nodded, though he wasn't sure he entirely believed her. He had spent his life trying to figure things out, trying to control the things he couldn't understand. But here, with Ayanna, something inside him shifted. Maybe it wasn't about control. Maybe it was about learning, listening, and simply being. The two of them stood in silence for a moment, the wind picking up slightly, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and earth. It was a familiar scent to Ayanna, one that grounded her in ways she couldn't explain. She felt at home here, just as Jacob felt both drawn to and distant from the land. As they walked back toward the house, Jacob's thoughts turned to the things that had brought him here. He had always been a man of action, of doing what needed to be done. But Ayanna had shown him something different, an understanding of the world that didn't come from hard work alone. It came from the land, from patience, and from a connection to something much deeper than what he had ever known. But as the day went on, Jacob began to sense that the outside world was pressing in. He couldn't ignore it any longer. His thoughts turned to the ranch again, to the cattle, and to the responsibilities that still awaited him. He had hoped that staying with Ayanna would give him the time he needed to think, but now he was torn. The longer he stayed, the more he felt like he was abandoning the life he had built. "I should probably head back," Jacob said later in the day as they sat by the fire. "I've been gone longer than I meant to." Ayanna didn't look surprised. She had known this moment would come, just as she had known it was inevitable. She had grown up in a world where people came and went, but the land remained. It was a constant. And she knew that Jacob, like many others, had a place he needed to return to. "I understand," she said, her voice calm. "The land calls to you in its own way too." Jacob felt a pang in his chest at her words. He had always thought of the ranch as his calling, but now, for the first time, he was beginning to question that. Was it truly his calling? Or was it just something he had always known, something he had always done because it was expected of him? "I'll miss this place," Jacob said softly. "It's peaceful here. I've never felt anything like it before." Ayanna smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the warmth of the fire. "The peace is always here, Jacob. You just have to find it inside yourself." Jacob stood up, his heart heavy with the decision he was about to make. He had come here to find rest, but what he had found was so much more. Ayanna had shown him a side of life he hadn't known he was missing. And now, as he prepared to leave, he felt torn between two worlds, the world of his ranch where he had worked for years, and the world that Ayanna represented, a world of connection, peace, and living in harmony with the land. "I don't know what I'm going to do," Jacob admitted. "But I can't stay here forever. There's too much waiting for me," Ayanna nodded. "You don't have to stay forever, but you can always come back. The desert has a way of drawing people in, even when they think they've left it behind." Jacob looked at her, his thoughts racing. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid of the unknown. Whatever he chose, he knew he would carry a piece of this place, and a piece of Ayanna, with him. As he prepared to leave, Ayanna handed him a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Take this," she said. "It's a gift, something to remember the desert by." Jacob took the bundle, feeling the weight of it in his hands. He wasn't sure what it was, but it felt like a part of her, a part of this land that he could take with him. "I won't forget this," Jacob said quietly. Ayanna's smile was small but warm. "You don't have to. The desert doesn't forget, and neither should you." As Jacob rode away, the land stretched out before him, wide and endless. But for the first time, it didn't feel empty. It felt full, full of possibility, full of memories, and full of the quiet voice of the desert calling him back. Jacob had been back at the ranch for a few days, but his mind was far from the familiar sights of the land he had known for so long. The smell of fresh hay, the sound of cattle lowing in the distance, the endless work, it all seemed distant now. His thoughts kept returning to Ayanna and the quiet peace of her home. No matter how hard he tried to focus on the tasks before him, the memory of her face, the calmness of the desert, and the connection he had felt with both haunted him. That evening, after a long day of working on the ranch, Jacob sat outside on the porch of his small cabin. The setting sun bathed the sky in shades of orange and purple, casting long shadows across the land. He leaned back in his chair, his hands resting on the worn wood of the porch, and looked out at the vast open space. The land stretched out endlessly before him, but instead of feeling at peace, he felt a strange emptiness. He thought of the land back at Ayana's home. The desert had a way of making you feel small, but it also made you feel connected to something larger than yourself. It was as if it held secrets, stories of those who had lived there for generations. It was a place that required patience, that gave back only when you learned to listen. Jacob hadn't been prepared for how much it would change him or how deeply it would affect him, but it had. The ranch had always been his home, his responsibility, but now it didn't feel like it belonged to him in the same way. He felt disconnected from it, like a piece of him was missing. He thought of Ayana, her calm presence, the way she seemed to live in perfect harmony with the land. He wanted that too. He wanted to find a way to be part of the world, rather than always trying to control it. The days passed, but the feeling of restlessness inside him only grew. His ranch, his cattle, the land he had spent so many years working, it all seemed like a world away from the quiet, peaceful desert where Ayana lived. He hadn't realized how much he needed a change until he had stepped into her world, even for just a short time. One morning, Jacob made up his mind. He couldn't ignore the pull he felt toward the desert any longer. He had to go back. Not just to visit, but to truly understand what he had left behind. He needed to see Ayana again, to ask her questions that had been on his mind since he had left. He had to know what she had meant when she talked about the land giving back, when she said you had to listen to it. He needed to know if he could find that kind of peace, too. As he rode out of the ranch the next day, the wind in his face and the sun rising higher in the sky, he couldn't shake the sense of urgency that came with his decision. His heart felt lighter now that he was heading towards something, even though he wasn't sure exactly what that something was. But one thing was clear. The life he had known, the one that revolved around cattle and constant work, no longer felt enough. He had to find more than just survival. He had to find meaning. The ride to Ayana's home seemed longer this time, the hours stretching out before him like a test of his patience. He had thought about turning back halfway through, about returning to the comfort of what he knew, but something inside him kept urging him forward. This was a journey he had to make, even if he didn't fully understand why. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he arrived at the small house again. The desert landscape greeted him with the same stillness as before, but this time it didn't feel as lonely. It felt like home. As he dismounted his horse, his eyes searched for Ayana. He spotted her in the distance, standing by the fire pit, her back to him. The sight of her brought a warmth to his chest, and for the first time since he had left, he felt like he had made the right choice. Ayana turned when she heard the sound of his horse's hooves. Her face lit up with a smile, a welcoming one, but there was something in her eyes, something deeper, that caught Jacob's attention. She seemed to know why he had returned, even before he had said a word. "You came back," Ayana said softly, her voice carrying a mix of surprise and relief. "I didn't expect to see you so soon." Jacob took a deep breath, his gaze meeting hers. "I couldn't stay away," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've been thinking about everything, about the ranch, about the work, about what I really want in life. And the more I think about it, the more I realize that this place, this land, it's where I feel at peace." Ayana stepped closer, her expression thoughtful. "I told you the desert has a way of pulling people in. It doesn't always make sense, but it always has a way of showing you what you need to see." Jacob smiled at her words. There was something about her quiet wisdom that made him feel grounded. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was on the right path. "I don't know what I'm doing," Jacob admitted, his voice a little uncertain. "But I know I don't want to keep running from something I don't understand. I want to learn, Ayana." I want to learn how to live in harmony with this land like you do." Yana looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if weighing his words. Then, without saying anything more, she reached out and placed a hand on his arm, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. Jacob felt the warmth of her touch spread through him, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade away. In that moment, nothing mattered except the two of them, standing in the quiet of the desert, the wind carrying with it the whispers of the land. "You don't have to have all the answers yet," Yana said gently. "This land has a way of teaching you if you're patient enough, if you listen." Jacob nodded, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. He didn't have to figure it all out right now. He didn't have to have everything planned or under control. He just had to be present. For the first time in a long time, he realized that it was okay to not have all the answers. What mattered was the journey, the lessons, and the people who walked alongside you. Over the next few days, Jacob found himself fully immersed in the life of the desert. He helped Ayana with the chores around the house, learning from her as she showed him how to live with the land, rather than against it. She taught him how to gather firewood in the most efficient way, how to track the movements of animals in the sand, and how to read the signs of the desert. Every day was a new lesson, and Jacob found himself growing in ways he hadn't expected. But despite the peace he was beginning to find in the desert, Jacob knew that there were still challenges ahead. Yana's community had not been entirely welcoming when he had first arrived. There were still those who saw him as an outsider, someone who didn't belong. He knew that if he was going to stay, he would have to prove himself, not just to Ayana, but to the people she cared about. One evening, as they sat together by the fire, Jacob looked at Ayana and asked, "Do you think your people will ever accept me? I don't want to cause any more trouble." Yana was quiet for a moment, her gaze focused on the flames. "Acceptance takes time," she said finally. "It's not something that happens overnight, but if you're willing to listen, to learn, and to respect the land, then maybe, just maybe, they'll see you differently." Jacob nodded, knowing that it wouldn't be easy, but for the first time he wasn't afraid of the challenge. He had found something here, something worth fighting for, and he wasn't ready to let it go. The days grew longer as Jacob settled into a new rhythm. The desert, with its harsh beauty and quiet power, became more familiar. What had once felt like an endless, empty stretch of land now felt like a place full of life, full of meaning. Yana's teachings had begun to take root in his mind, and little by little, Jacob was learning to see the world through different eyes. The land, once something he fought to control, was now something he was learning to understand, to respect. But even with the peace he was finding in the desert, Jacob's heart was torn. The ranch still called to him, the work, the responsibility. It was the life he had known for years, and it had shaped him in ways he couldn't easily ignore. The cattle needed his attention, the fences needed repairs, and the day-to-day tasks of running the ranch didn't stop just because Jacob had decided to take a break. Ayana had noticed the quiet conflict in him. She had seen the way his eyes would drift back to the horizon at times, as if something was pulling him away. She had seen the way he worked with her, learning the ways of the desert, but she also saw the lingering weight of the ranch on his shoulders. She knew that the land of the desert could only offer him so much, and the choice between the two worlds, his old life and the one he was building here, was growing more difficult with each passing day. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, Jacob sat outside near the fire, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Ayana came to sit beside him, her presence familiar and steady. She didn't say anything at first. She simply sat beside him, the silence comfortable between them. Jacob felt the pull of the desert again, but he also felt the weight of his past life pressing down on him. "I've been thinking," Jacob finally said, his voice quieter than usual. "About the ranch, about everything. I can't just ignore it, it's a part of me, but being here with you, with the land, it's different. I've never felt like this before." Yana turned to look at him, her eyes calm but thoughtful. "What are you saying, Jacob?" Jacob took a deep breath, feeling the uncertainty in his chest. "I don't know if I can keep living the way I was. The ranch, the work, it feels like it's taking over my life. I've spent years focused on it, but I don't know if it's enough anymore. I feel like I'm missing something." Yana's gaze softened. She had known this day would come, though she had hoped it wouldn't arrive so soon. She had watched Jacob struggle with his inner conflict, torn between the life he had built and the life he was beginning to see here, in the desert. She knew that this was a choice only he could make, and that it would not be easy. "Living here in the desert, it's different from what you're used to," Yana said gently. "It's not easy and it's not always peaceful. There's a certain way of life here, a way of listening, of being in harmony with the land. But it's not a life everyone can choose." Jacob nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I know," he said. "I've seen the way people live here. It's not about control, it's about patience. And I've spent my whole life trying to control things. It's hard for me to let go of that." Yana reached over and placed her hand gently on his arm, the warmth of her touch comforting in the quiet of the evening. "You don't have to let go of everything. It's not about abandoning who you were. It's about learning something new, about finding a balance. The land doesn't ask you to give up your past. It only asks that you respect it." Jacob looked at her, his mind racing. He knew she was right, but it was hard to imagine stepping away from everything he had worked for. The ranch had been his life for so long, and he had built it from the ground up. It was more than just a place. It was his identity. But what good was the ranch if he felt disconnected from it? What good was a life filled with work if it didn't bring him peace? "I've spent so many years focused on building something," Jacob said slowly. "But I never stopped to think about what I was building it for. What good is a ranch if you don't have anyone to share it with? What good is all that work if it doesn't bring you happiness?" Yana didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood up and walked a few steps away, her gaze fixed on the vast desert stretching out before them. Jacob watched her, his heart heavy with the uncertainty that hung in the air. She was right, but what did that mean for him? Could he really walk away from the ranch, from everything he knew, and start over? After a moment, Yana turned back to him, her expression calm but serious. "Sometimes, the hardest choices are the ones that lead to the most meaningful change," she said softly. "You don't have to have all the answers, but if you're willing to listen, to learn, the path will open up." Jacob felt a surge of emotion as he listened to her. Her words struck something deep inside him, something he hadn't fully understood until now. It wasn't about abandoning everything he had worked for. It was about finding a new way to live, a way that brought balance and peace. He didn't have to give up the ranch, but he did need to change the way he approached it. Maybe he didn't have to control everything. Maybe he could learn to listen to the land, to work with it, rather than against it. "I think I'm ready to make a choice," Jacob said, his voice steady. "I can't keep living this way, constantly running from one thing to the next. I need to find a way to make it all work, my ranch, the land, my life. And I need to do it in a way that brings me peace, not just work." Yana smiled, a small but warm smile. "That's the first step, Jacob. It's not about abandoning everything, it's about learning how to live with it. The desert will teach you just like it taught me, but you have to be willing to listen." Jacob stood up, his mind clearer than it had been in days. He knew that the choice he was making wasn't easy, but it was the right one. He didn't have to give up everything he had worked for. He just had to find a new way to live, a new way to work with the land, rather than fight it. The next morning, Jacob sat down and wrote a letter to the men who helped run his ranch. He told them that he would be taking some time off, that he needed to step back and reassess how things were being done. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew that something had to change. He couldn't keep running on autopilot, doing the same thing day after day, without ever stopping to consider what it all meant. As he sent the letter off, Jacob felt a sense of relief wash over him. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was making a decision that was truly his. He wasn't running from anything anymore. He was choosing to live in a way that brought him peace, a way that allowed him to listen to the land and to his heart. Later that day, Yana met him by the fire. Her smile was knowing, as if she had already anticipated the choice he would make. "You've made your decision then?" she asked. Jacob nodded. "I have. It's not going to be easy, but I'm going to find a way to balance the ranch and the land. I'm going to learn how to live with the desert, not fight it." Yana's smile grew wider. "I think you'll find the peace you're looking for, Jacob, but remember, it's a journey. And every journey begins with one step." Jacob looked at her, his heart full of gratitude. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid. He had found something worth fighting for, a life of balance, a life of peace, and perhaps even a life with Ayana. As they stood together in the quiet of the desert, the wind soft and warm around them, Jacob knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter. He had made his choice, and now he was ready to walk the path before him.